head. It's so you don't get hurt. It's a biological, natural biological reaction. The blood vessels in the brain dilate, you're mentally aroused, you have a rush, you pay attention to stimuli in your environment. There's also an internal reason that comes from the outside, and that is that media is very attractive. It's full of sounds and sights and vibrations and stimulation. When your phone's sitting here and it goes like this and it vibrates, that grabs your attention. And it's very interesting and it's very exciting and you want to know what's there. We'll talk later about that. Is it really multitasking? All the research shows that you can't multitask. I mean, yes, to a certain extent you can. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, most of us. But you really can't do two tasks at the same time. If I put headphones on your head like this and I played one message into this ear and one message into this ear and I told you to pay total attention to this ear but try to figure out what's in this ear at the same time, you couldn't do it. Even if this ear is saying your name over and over and over again, you won't notice it because you're totally paying attention to here. If I ask you to have a conversation with me but there's 5 cross conversations, I can't do it. You can't pay attention that way. The reason that we think we can multitask is because really what we're doing is minuscule little minute task switches. So the easiest one is texting. If you text, you think you're multitasking, but you text and then you have a little bit of what's called slack time. Between the time you text and the time you expect to text back, could be 10 seconds, 15 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So you switch to something else and do that, and then you switch back when the text comes in. So part of why kids, younger generations like technology is because it affords a lot of task switching. It allows you to switch because there's slack time when things aren't happening as opposed to things happening. The most interesting slack time, by the way, is when you're loading a website. Unless you are on a super fast T1 connection, websites could take 2, 3, 5, 6 seconds to load. Now that doesn't seem like a lot of time. For us old people, 6 seconds seems like, it's no big deal. We just sit and wait and watch the screen. If you watch younger people, the amount of time that a young person is willing to wait for a website to load is, guesses?
Less than a second.
How much?
Less than a second.
Less than a second? Any guesses? That's pretty close. 2 seconds. The average young person is willing to wait 2 seconds. If a website doesn't load within 2 seconds, they click on something else. So the technology really affords you to switch. You can try to do things at the same time. You can really try, and the more dissimilar the tasks are, the easier it is to do 2 things at the same time. So if you're trying to read a book but read something on a screen, you can't do those. Those are too similar. But if you're trying to play a video game but also to read something, those are different enough that it's easier to task switch, easier to multitask. The more difficult the tasks are, the more difficult it is to switch back and forth. Now, in California, you can not talk on a handheld phone and drive at the same time. That's not true in Pennsylvania though, right? You can talk on a phone and drive? Is that true? Because I did it last night. I figured it was. Is it not legal? You can't talk on the phone? Uh-oh.
In certain cities it's not legal.
Certain cities it's not legal. The reason that that was made illegal is because talking on the phone and driving both take a tremendous amount of mental processing. The more mental processing it takes, the harder it is to do 2 things at the same time. So why isn't it too difficult to drive and talk to a passenger? That's not illegal, right? You can talk to a passenger still. Why isn't that illegal?
You've got another set of eyes on the road most of the time.
You mean they're looking at the road for you?
You got a passenger in there, a lot of times they're watching and they know when not to.
So they'll go, look out!
They won't ask you questions in maybe some of the more dire situations.
Okay, so if you get into a bad situation,
They'll know to be quiet.
okay,
When a driver needs to focus. Well, most people will know to be quiet when a driver needs to focus.
okay, that's one of the explanations. Got a second one?
Is it more like dangerous to talk on the phone because you can't actually see the person, so your brain kind of has to focus, like try to.
Perfect. Perfect. What it does is it takes extra brain power. In psychology, we call it context. If the person's sitting next to me in the passenger seat, I know their context. They're sitting right there. I can look at them, I can see their facial expressions, I know if they're pissed at me, I know if they're laughing hysterically and they're happy, I know if they're crying, I know their context. If you're on the phone to somebody, you're exactly right. You have to guess their context. You might have to ask, are you okay? Are you happy? Are you sad? Whatever. You don't know their context, so you're using a lot of extra power of your brain to figure out their context. Now the funny thing is there any difference between handheld and hands-free phone in figuring out somebody's context? No, not at all. Yet in California, you can talk on a hands-free phone, but not a handheld phone. Why? No good reason. There's absolutely no reason. Either you ban both of them or neither of them. Doesn't matter. It's the same distraction. They thought, oh, there's more of a distraction of holding a phone. How many people actually drive with two hands anymore? You're driving with one and you're checking your radio and stuff with the other hand. That's not a ticket. So it's the context that requires you to do that. And the media itself affords task switching. If you watch TV, it's not just a TV screen anymore. There's information scrolling on the left and the right and going this way and that way and up and down. And so it affords task switching. If you watch the presidential debates on CNN, drove me crazy that they had that thing on the bottom with the independent voters in such and such, I guess the last one, I forget, in Virginia or whatever. And you're looking at the women and the men. And did you notice that you found yourself looking only at that and not even listening to what they were saying? That's distracting. So the technology itself distracts you. So the costs of multitasking are varied, you know this, but these two are really important. Multitasking leads to poor sleep habits and overuse of caffeine. Why do you overuse caffeine? Because when you multitask or when you're constantly task switching, you're using more mental resources and they run out. And at some point, you need caffeine to give you the illusion that you have more resources. You don't. You have the same amount of resources, you're just hyper about it. Kids don't sleep. That's the bottom line. All the research shows that the average teen or young adult averages 6.1 hours per school night and tries to make it up by sleeping 10.3 hours a night on weekends. American Pediatric Association recommends that you sleep 9 hours a night. How many people sleep 9 hours a night? Nobody, right? If you don't sleep 9 hours a night, and particularly teenagers, if they don't sleep 9 hours a night, they accumulate what's called a sleep debt. And this is like you owe money, except you owe sleep. What happens is when you have a sleep debt, your brain stops functioning well. And the reason it stops functioning well is sleep is absolutely critical to brain functioning. When you are awake during the day, you're getting lots of stimulation. Your brain's getting lots of stimulation. The neurons are communicating with each other. Your nerve cells are growing little shoots off of them. They're called axons and dendrites to communicate with other nerve cells. You're learning information, you're trying to accumulate information, and your brain's working really hard. At night, when you go to sleep, your brain does a bunch of bookkeeping stuff. It does a bunch of sort of, you might call it formatting. It kind of formats your brain in the middle of the night. And if you've ever read into the research about sleep, the way the process of sleep goes is if you are a well-rested human being and you go to sleep, you're asleep for about 90 minutes, go through several sleep stages, and then you dream. And dream is a separate sleep stage. You know how you can tell, right? You watch somebody's eyelids, and if they're fluttering, they're dreaming. It's called rapid eye movements. And so you sleep for about 90 minutes. Your first dream in the middle after that 90 minutes is about 3 minutes. It's a very short little dream. Then you go back into those sleep stages for another 90 minutes, and then you have a little bit longer dream, about 15 minutes. Then you go into another 90-minute sleep stage, and you have about a 30-minute dream state. And then you go another 90 minutes, and then you have about an hour. Your last dream is about an hour. So if you add it up, at about 7 to 8 hours is when you're dreaming. And for most people, that's when you wake up. How many people wake up in the middle of a dream? Most people do. And that's because that's the way the normal sleep cycle works. Now notice I said if you're well rested. If you're not well rested, what happens is that first 90 minutes goes away. You immediately start dreaming. And why do you start dreaming? Because your brain needs to dream. But your brain also needs those 90 minutes because during those 90 minutes, it does its reformatting. And what that means is your brain sort of on its own goes scouting around and it looks for information that's created during the day. Connections between neurons, little axons, little dendrites, the chemicals going back and forth between neurons. And it makes some decisions. It decides what's the good stuff that I might want to keep for later and what's the bad stuff that I might want to get rid of. If it keeps it for later, it's called consolidation. If it gets rid of it, it's called pruning, just like you prune a tree. It cuts off those pieces that it doesn't need. If your brain doesn't have those sets of 90 minutes to do the pruning and consolidation, then your brain becomes kind of a mass of confusion because it's carrying both stuff that ordinarily it would throw out, but it's also carrying stuff that it should have solidified and consolidated at night, but it didn't have time to do it. So the less you sleep, the less you learn and remember, or put better, you can't remember the right stuff. The right stuff is not differentiated because the wrong stuff would have been pruned and the right stuff would have been consolidated, and you're not getting a chance to do that. So sleep is critical, and if you're running at a sleep debt, you just fall asleep and go straight into dream state. Anybody take naps during the day? When you nap, do you dream? How long do you nap for typically?
2 hours maybe.
Okay. Do you dream immediately, do you think, or do you sleep 90 minutes and then go into a dream?
Dream probably immediately.
Yeah. When you take a nap, you almost always dream immediately. You know why? Why do you take a nap? Because you're tired, right? You don't take a nap because you feel good. You take a nap because you're tired. And if you're tired, then you didn't get enough sleep. Your naps are actually trying to make up for this 12 hours per week sleep debt. And so that's a good indication that your brain is not getting a chance to work right. We've just done a study where we looked at teens and what they do in the last hour before they go to sleep. And not surprisingly, they use their smartphone a lot. They use the internet a lot. They do schoolwork, which is good. But then they also text as much and Facebook and listen to music, etc. And we asked the questions as to what they do with their phone when they go to sleep. If you look just at the green area and this sort of orange area, this is almost all of this, and this is who leaves the ringer on, and this is who puts it on vibrate. So we asked the question, what does research say about sleep disruption? What is it that causes sleep disruption? People mostly believe that it has to do with a chemical called melatonin. When you start to get sleepy, your brain produces melatonin, and melatonin then puts you to sleep. Literally, that's its job. If you are watching TV, if you are looking at screens, light, artificial light, retards the production of melatonin. So that's why if you're really tired but you have the room lights on, it's going to be harder for you to go to sleep because the melatonin is not being produced. At least that's the theory. That's the theory from most sleep researchers. It turns out that we actually in this study measured how much melatonin you got. You can do it one of two ways. You can actually take a sample of saliva and it'll tell you how much melatonin there is, but it costs a lot of money to do that. Or you can simply measure how much time do people spend in front of different devices, how far away the device is, and how big the device is. So we asked people in the study, how much do you use your smartphone in the hour before you go to sleep, and how far is it from your face? How much do you use your computer, and how big is it, and how far is it in front of your face? How much do you watch TV? How big is the TV? How far is it in front of your face? How much is the room light on? Is it on full? Is it dimmed? How much of the time of the hour before you go to sleep? We did this complicated calculation formula and came up with a calculation that should have worked, and in fact it didn't. When we were going to predict what disrupted sleep, it is not the light. The light didn't matter. It is not watching TV or playing video games. In fact, it turned out that watching TV, those kids who watched more TV in the hour before they went to sleep slept better than those kids who didn't. So somehow TV is good for helping you go to sleep. I can explain that later if you want. It's not using the computer, so what is it? It's those people who multitask more in the hour before they go to sleep, who use their smartphone more in the hour before they go to sleep, and who sleep with their cell phone either on or vibrate all night long. Those are the three factors that go into disrupted sleep. So the bottom line is there's this concept in psychology called metacognition. And metacognition really means literally thinking about thinking. It's higher order thinking about how one thinks. Really, metacognition is understanding how your brain works. And most of what I do now is trying to help people or help myself understand what my brain does during the day and during the night. Metacognition is knowing how you learn better, what conditions you learn well in. Do you learn well with earbuds in, or do you learn well in quiet? How many people study in absolute quiet? Okay. Why do you study in quiet? Why have you decided to study in quiet?
Because a lot of things distract.
So, okay, so you've decided otherwise it would be distracted. Who studies with music on? Okay, why do you study with music? Actually, behind you, you've already talked about it. Behind you. Why do you study with music on?
If I just sit there and study and listen to silence, I just let my mind wander.
Okay, so your mind wanders and you get
Yeah.
distracted. So what kind of music do you listen to?
Music no one in here probably can understand.
Is it music that you've heard a lot, that you know really well?
Yeah, because it's kind of like my background noise.
Okay. That's the recommendation, by the way, is if you're going to study with music on, only study with music that you know so well that you can sing it in your sleep. You know why? When you look at the brain activity and you look at the brain listening to a brand new piece of music by your famous artist, your favorite artist, whoever it happens to be, there's a lot of brain activity going on the first couple times you listen to that piece of music. Once you've listened to it a few times, there's very little brain activity going on. Meaning, as long as you're listening to stuff that you know really well, you're not distracting yourself. You're leaving enough of your brain open. Should you listen to just classical music without words? Only if you really listen to classical music all the time, and it's pieces that you can do this and bat out the tune and hum. Otherwise, classical music is no better. I mean, professors always used to tell me when I was a student, oh, study with classical music. It's so mellowing and calming, and there's no words to distract you. Actually, the best thing to study to is music that you are very, very, very familiar with. So we did a study to see about metacognition. Actually, that's a lie. We did a study to see about distractions. It turned into a study about metacognitions accidentally. What we did is we went into 4 different classrooms, psychology classrooms. We got a list of everybody's cell phone number and their cell phone carrier, and we asked them to allow us to text them during class. We set up a class such that they were going to watch a 30-minute video, and they knew that they might get texted during class. They all had their phones out on vibrate only, not on sound, and they knew that right after the 30-minute video, they were going to be tested, and it was going to count in their grade. So we made it really important, okay? We split the people randomly in each class into 3 groups. A third of them randomly got no text from us. A third of them got 4 texts from us in 30 minutes, and a third of them got 8 texts from us in 30 minutes. The only instruction we gave was, we're going to text you, please respond. That is a mistake. I'll explain to you why. That was a stupid mistake. What we meant to say was, please respond when you get the text. The reason we said that is because we timed the text messages to arrive when information was on the video screen that was going to be on the test. The test had 18 questions on it. Those 8 text messages were all timed to arrive at one of those 8 of those spots for the test questions, right? So we thought, oh, they'll get a text message, they'll lean down, they'll text, they'll miss what's on the screen. That was our idea, right? Well, it sort of worked. The group that got no text averaged a C on the test, 72%. The group that got 4 text averaged a little bit less, only 70%, but those were equal statistically, no difference. The group that got 8 texts got a D. Okay, so far so good. When we started looking at the data more carefully, we realized that some people didn't respond immediately. In fact, they waited. And so the white line here is how long they waited to read the text message, to look at it, from the first minute, the second minute, the third, the fourth, etc. The green line is how long they waited to respond, first minute, second minute, third minute, fourth minute, and the score they got on the test. So if they responded really quickly, they got about a C on the test. If they waited to respond, they got an A. And we asked them afterwards, because we didn't expect this, so we asked them afterwards, why did you wait to respond? And the answer was, we waited for a time on the video that we thought wouldn't be on the test, and that was a good time to respond. That is metacognition. That is metacognition. When I teach in a classroom like this, but it's got 450 seats, and I tell students they can text all they want. They can't answer the phone, but they can text, they can have their laptop out, they have wireless, they can do whatever they want. They want to be on Facebook, cool, I don't care. But I tell them, this is the first lecture, and I tell them, if you want to see, go ahead and text away. Just text immediately. Every time you get a text in class, just text back. If you want an A, figure out what the best time to text back is. Wait until I'm saying something totally boring that you think isn't going to be on the test, then text back. And I did that the other day. There was a woman sitting right here in the front row, and I watched her. She got a text. I don't know why she was sitting in the front row, but she got a text, and I had a slide on the screen, and I was talking about it. She got a text, and she's very carefully, not even hiding it because I don't care, she's very carefully texting back. I moved to the next screen, and I said, stop for a second. And I asked her, I said, did you get what I just talked about on that last screen? She went, no. What was on the last screen? I went back, showed it to her. She goes, oh, I didn't hear that at all. I said, maybe you want to go back to that study that I talked about the first day of class about when to text and when not to text, because you just proved my point. You missed everything. And just all she did was send a text, but she missed the entire slide and all the information. So how do you do this? One of the simplest methods is called the ABC method. A is being aware of your options, and really it's being aware of your distractors. So it's like what you said when you said you study in quiet. You get rid of your distractors. So being aware of your distractors is important, and really being aware of what personally distracts you. Music doesn't distract me much at all. So I'm actually happy listening to really loud music. It doesn't distract me in anything except when I'm writing. And I know when I'm writing, I need no sound whatsoever. TV distracts me totally, so I know it has to be off. I can't work with the TV on at all. So being aware of your distractors. B, I'm going to talk about calming and resetting your brain in a bit, but it's breathe for calm and reset yourself. And C, choose good options. Use metacognition. Know how your brain works. That's important. I already said that about music. Going to move on. How much time do I have? We have till 8:30? Yeah, we have till 8:30? Good. Got some more stuff I want to show you. We do a lot of studying of values. We don't just look at generations, we look at their values and try to figure out what they believe in. Whoops, sorry, backwards. So we've been studying both the two youngest generations, the I generation and Generation C, those two young groups born in the 90s and the new millennium. And we're finding that their values are very different than older generations. For one, they have really three core values. One is social connections. They believe that social connections are everything, and not necessarily face-to-face connections. It doesn't mean they can't have them, but any kind of connection, and that means usually virtual, Facebook kind of connections, other social media kind of connections. When you watch younger kids, instead of doing things that ordinarily in my generation or the generations after they would have done in pairs, they do in large groups because they believe in social groups. They do not like projects in classes unless you can work with other people. In general, the younger ones, they would prefer to work with other people. They believe in speed and immediacy, and that's an obvious one because they've grown up in a generation or an era where everything happens fast. If you grew up in my era where we worked on 300 baud rate modems that literally you'd take the phone, ring it, stick it in the coupler, and then wait about 5 minutes to make a connection, speed and immediacy was nothing. 5 minutes seemed like a short amount of time. Now when you're connected to the internet and everything happens really fast, 2 seconds is the sort of limit of how much time people are willing to wait. And then this idea that anything that can be done, they can do. It's this whole new concept of younger people creating their own businesses. It's the Mark Zuckerberg concept of creating a company at a young age. It's the entrepreneurship drive of the two younger generations. They honestly believe that if they have an idea, they can actualize the idea, put it into action, make a lot of money on it, and then do something different. They trust themselves, Some people say this is the most narcissistic generation. They trust other people. They have a very spoiled upbringing. Sorry to tell you, those of you who are young, they have a very spoiled upbringing. They've been brought up with anything they want, toys, games. In the old days, by old days I mean 40s and 50s, Christmas meant you got a present if you were lucky. These days, Christmas, you get dozens of presents. In the old days, you got a trophy if your team won a sport. These days, you get a trophy if your team plays in a sport. It's very different. It's a very different, sort of promotes very different ideas about the world. This generation, the new generations, are very idealistic, very liberal. They have obviously different communication modalities, very different career goals. Previous generations expected to be in a job and to eventually find what job they were going to work in fairly quickly. The younger generations job hop. When they're in the job market, they job hop from year to year to year, for good reason sometimes. The younger generations are way more connected to family, and sadly, for those of you who have kids in college, they'll probably move back home because that's what they do. They move back home. And when this young generation is asked, who are your best friends? And they ask it in a variety of ways. Who would you go to with a problem? Who is the first person you would talk to? It's almost always somebody in their family. The generation before that, it was always their best friend. The generation before that, it was always their best friend. All of a sudden now it's back to their family. They have a very strong work ethic, but they're very distractible. They're very, very social, but they do not like hierarchies. These young generations do not like the boss-worker hierarchy, the professor-student hierarchy. Up until recently, I rarely got complaints from students. And all of a sudden I started getting complaints, but not in person, only by email. I started to get one here, one there, and I've noticed that it accelerates. And the reason it's happening is because these younger generations that are moving into the classrooms don't believe there should be a hierarchy. They believe that they can talk to a professor the same way that they talk to a friend. So I'll get an email that says, Dr. Rosen, that was a crappy lecture. You went too fast, your slides were crappy, I didn't like the lecture, you really need to change that one. And my answer is always the same. Thank you so much for your feedback. Can you come chat with me after class? I would like to hear more feedback. They never come after class. And in a class of 400, I never know who they are. It's that sense of behind the screen, they have this anonymity and they can say whatever they want and feel comfortable doing that. And it's very difficult in a university setting. It's more difficult in a business setting. Because in a business setting, they just assume since they're available 24/7, their boss